way that earns your favor, not the way that earns your anger or leads astray, leads one to confusion. Alhamdulillah. Now, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. And peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad and his family and his companions. It's a very usual opening to open up this way. And forgive me for my hesitation. I don't usually lead these calls, so I'm kind of new to doing so. So something a little more familiar and comfortable with. I'd like to introduce Mona. We've been having this conference call going for about 3, maybe 4 years now. She was a very regular member in the beginning for I think at least 2 years. A wonderful person. Had the pleasure of meeting her and spending time with her and her husband and having lunch with her. Just a little bit from her bio. She's a poet, an active practitioner of permaculture, mediator, composting devotee, self-proclaimed mountain girl, solar power lover, and tireless God enthusiast. She teaches classes and retreats on mindfulness, Islamic spirituality, leads workshops on creative writing, and performs her poetry. Her words have found homes in the hearts of seekers, wanderers, poets, artists, lovers, and stewards of the earth. She grew up in Flint, Michigan, graduated from the University of Michigan, and has since lived in Damascus, where she studied Arabic and Islamic spirituality. Then went on to live in the mountains of northern New Mexico at the Lama Foundation and in the Redwood Forest near Northern California with her husband and son. Mona and her husband Sebastian set up a stand in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with signs that read "Talk to a Muslim, free coffee and donuts." This was in the beginning of some early controversy, about a year and a half ago, I believe. And you can go into that more. And the sign also said "Ask a Muslim," encouraging open and loving dialogue. And it garnered attention by NPR and Al Jazeera and the Boston Globe and other media outlets. Currently, she's working on her second collection of poems, and her first work on nonfiction on Islamic spirituality through the lens of other spiritual traditions. I look forward to seeing that. Alhamdulillah. She is working towards her master's in divinity, and she hopes to grow in more universal love with her activism, writing, performing, and teaching. You can find out more about her at www.monahaydar.com, MONAHAYDAR.com. Feel free to email me and I can send you that link if you need. And with that, I am turning it to you, Mona. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings, everyone. Just so you all know, I'm currently standing up, wearing a baby sling with a baby inside of it. So I'm bouncing. So you'll probably hear that in my voice. I'm trying to keep the baby happy while I talk to you all, and hopefully the bounce will work. We'll see. But I'm really excited about this topic. I think Imam Mendes called it. What did he call it? He had such a beautiful title for it. He called it Mindfulness, the Moon, and Menstruation. And I just love what he did with all those M's, of course, because my name is Mona. Anyway, I'm super excited about this because it's one of the topics that I feel like we just don't talk about enough. There is, women's bodies are so cloaked in shame, veiled in shame, if you will. And that's not our way. That's not our path. Shame is not our path. We, the path of true submission, the path of true oneness and true witnessing is a path of love. And it's not a path of guilt and shame. Sure, they're good tools on the spiritual path, but the extent that we've used these tools and abused them is actually one of the reasons we're seeing such global, delusion about bodies and what bodies are good for and what they're not good for, and the abuse of certain kinds of bodies, namely women's bodies, and that's one of the reasons that patriarchy and misogyny can exist. So one of the things that we can do if we're true believers is to rectify our understanding of what these bodies are meant to do and what these bodies are for. And if we come to know what these bodies are for, which is, of course, the service, to be in the service, in sacred service of the divine oneness, we can rectify some real global problems. And it starts with us, right? It starts with us as individuals, and we make those changes individually, and, God willing, it moves out. And so I'm going to be talking about, what it is for a woman to bleed and why it's important to talk about that, why it's important to understand why this is such a huge topic. So in the Quran, there's an amazing chapter of the Quran called Surah Al-Tahrim. And Surah Al-Tahrim is chapter 66 of the Quran. And in that chapter, one of the amazing things about this chapter is it starts out with a story. And the story is that it starts out with a story. It says, "O Prophet, why do you make what is unlawful, which God has made, why have you made unlawful that which God has made lawful unto you, seeking the goodwill of your wives? And God is all forgiving, all merciful. Surely God has ordained for you absolution from your oaths, and God is your patron, and he is the knower, the wise." And so this goes on, and it comes to talk about the relationships between spouses. And, we have probably all been in relationships, understanding that this is, more of an adult conversation. We've all been in relationships, and relationships take a lot of hard work. And the Quran is amazing in that it starts out by attempting to display the fact that these relationships are difficult. They take hard work, and they take discipline. And so later on in this surah, in this chapter, in ayah number 9, it talks about the wife of Noah. And if you know the story of Noah, it's pretty incredible that even a prophet, a male prophet, yes, a man prophet, couldn't save his wife from disbelief. He could not bring his wife out of the fold of disbelief into the fold of belief. That, somebody you are intimate with, someone you're that close to, and not being able to, work with them and convince them and be with them in such a way that they could see that, that you are speaking truth. So even in that most intimate of relationships, a prophet couldn't bring his wife into the fold of belief. And then in verse 10, it talks about the wife of Pharaoh. And isn't it interesting that it talks about, the women in these verses? But it talks about the wife of Pharaoh and how the wife of Pharaoh was this righteous woman, even though she was married to arguably one of the greatest tyrants, one of the greatest oppressors of all time, a known slave driver who people just died in droves while they were building these, grand monuments to honor him as a god. And so, she is married to this insane tyrant, right? And even he, this tyrant, this oppressor of people whom is, essentially damned, even he couldn't drag this righteous woman down, right? And in verse 11, it talks about the story of Mary, who, the verse talks about how she preserved herself and she kept herself for God, and how God breathed into her of God's Spirit, and how she testified to the truth and to the words of God, and she was a devotee. She was devoted to the divine, right? And so you have these three examples of how this woman who is unattached to a man in Mary, right? She's unattached to a man. She has no man in her life until she bears Jesus. Upon him be peace and blessings. She has no man in her life, and yet she is righteous. She is saved. She is full of glory. She is full of the grace of God, and she is this incredible spiritual woman, and some would even say that she was a prophet of God. There are certainly those opinions within even mainstream Islam which consider her a prophet. They're not a majority of the opinion, but it certainly exists. And so, from a very Quranic perspective, I think we can deduce based on these verses, and this is exactly why I wanted to start in this place, but we can deduce from these verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God in God's glory, has made it a law of the universe that a woman's salvation is not in the hands of a man. And so if we come to that conclusion that a woman's salvation is not in the hands of a man, and that women are fully independent and in agency and in ownership of their own relationships with their creator, that women, what does that mean for the balance and harmony of the universe? Well, it means one thing, that the great unbalance we see in the world is due to this not being harmonious, to us not living this truth, right? To us believing the lie we've been told by patriarchy that women must be subjugated and women's bodies can only be understood by men. And so one of the things that Islamic theology is, kind of a casualty of, is patriarchy. And this isn't true across, the board. This is certainly in certain cases, only in certain cases. But you have, legal rulings that are clearly not aligned with this harmonious and balanced worldview that the Quran provides us. It actually exists within that paradigm of fiction, which is the patriarchy, instead of the paradigm of truth and oneness, which is the one we seek to live in, that paradigm of love, right? And so how do we rectify that? Well, one of the ways is for women and men to understand the bodies of women, to understand women, period, to understand what and why are women, half of the equation. And so, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Can I give you him? just going to hand off my baby so that I can stop bouncing for you all. Okay, I'm back. So, in order to rectify that, right, we have to sweep ourselves up into rebalancing the scales, right? And so, learning about women and learning about women's bodies, I think is incumbent not just on women but on men as well, because in order to work together, we have to understand each other in order to heal the world of some of the challenges we're facing, some of the tribulations, some of the trauma and the wounds. We truly have to work together to understand, what's going on in the world. And so, what is it that, why do women bleed on a month-to-month basis? And so, the Arabic word is hayd, right? And hayd is the origin of life. The Creator made a woman as a caretaker for the world by proxy of the children she bears, right? So if you take care of a woman, you've taken care of all of humanity, essentially. And so every month when a woman bleeds, essentially the womb sheds that thing which would support life. And there's an amazing teacher named Khalis Jalabi who says that the womb, the womb in its desire to be a life bringer, to be something that supports the creation of life, something that bears life, and not death, it weeps every month, and that weeping is the shedding of this lining, this bleeding. And so the weeping is blood instead of tears, at the loss of the prospect of being a life bringer for that cycle. And so hayd in Arabic comes from the word for flow or current, as in flowing water. And so there are no negative connotations there. It's actually very beautiful imagery of beautiful flowing water, right? And so when you think about the Arabians, to have the imagery of water was actually for this thing is actually pretty incredible as a desert people, right? And so the wife of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he, there was a time when he was, there was a time when he was, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it in my notes. There was a time when he wanted some of the pages of the Quran, some of the sahifa, the transcribed pages of the Quran that were written. And he asked his beloved wife, Aisha, to go and get that for him. And she responded by saying that, she was bleeding. And he asked her, Haydatuki biyadik, that is your bleeding, is your hayd, is your flow in your hand. Basically, he's telling her that there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to go and touch or be with this sahifa, this thing that carries the divine word of God, the thing on which the Quran is transcribed. And so, we have the tradition in a lot of Islamic legal thought that a woman who is on her period, a woman who is on her moon, that she shouldn't touch the Quran, right? That she shouldn't touch the divinely descended words of God. And this actually is not based on the idea, this is not based on the idea of any Quranic principle. And there are people who say that it does, and that the verse which refers to this is the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which Allah says that, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, that no one shall touch it except those who are purified. And the word mutahharun, if we're going to be really, nitpicky, mutahharun is a state of purity, that none shall touch it except those who have been purified, right? Except for those who have been purified, not those who have purified themselves. So this is actually, according to some interpretations, referring to angels, and angels in the tablet, which descended from Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad, and not actually the physical compiled Quran. That mutahharun refers to angels, and not human beings, since human beings enter willingly into the state of purity simply by performing wudu, by washing themselves. Whereas angels are constantly in that state. They are constantly in that purified state, simply because they are angels. They never exit out of the state of ritual purity. And so that ayah being used from a jurisprudence perspective, sure, it can be interpreted that way, that a woman shouldn't touch the Quran, but I think it's a very simplistic and basic understanding of that verse. What that verse is really trying to teach us. And we need to keep in mind also that during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, there was no written and compiled Quran. So the notion, that notion is simply fiction. That a woman who is on her moon shouldn't touch the Quran. It's just not consistent with logic. And so, there are women who like to uphold that practice, and there are women who choose not to. And I think respect needs to be given to both choices and both opinions. And we need to exist in a world where both opinions are respected and valued. And so, one of the amazing things about hayd, about the flow and the cycle, and a woman being on her moon, is that a woman doesn't choose to be on her moon, right? A woman doesn't make this choice. And so one of the things that Sheikh al-Qaradawi, who is an amazing scholar, an Azhari scholar, he talks about the difference between janaba and hayd. And janaba is the state which you enter into after engaging in intimate relations with your significant other. And hayd is the state which a woman enters into not of her own accord, right? And so the fuqaha, the jurists, often conflate the two, and they associate hayd and janaba. And this is actually really problematic. And Sheikh al-Qaradawi is the one who points this out. And he talks about how you cannot conflate the two, and you cannot really even put the two in significant relationship to one another, because hayd is not entered into, and nafas, which is when a woman bleeds postpartum, you cannot put that in conversation with something which is entered into willingly, like janaba. And so, a woman cannot enter or exit from her cycle, from her moon, by will or desire. And so it is so important for us to recognize that, when the jurists conflate the two, it's problematic because, it essentially is saying that a woman's body, that, a woman, well, essentially it is that a man is making those assessments. And that's the problematic piece, because when you have someone who hasn't gone through that experience, making those assessments, you miss out. You lose the more subtle. You lose the more subtle understandings. And so one of the beautiful things is that during this time, during this more spiritual time, that God has gifted a woman, essentially, because a woman doesn't enter into it willingly. I choose to see that as a time that is gifted to a woman. And so a week of each month, women are majdubin, right? They are pulled, they are magnetized by a force, which comes directly from the oneness, which comes directly from the cosmos and the relationship of the moon to the earth. And it's not something that we choose to engage in. It's simply the way that women were created in perfect harmony, right, with the earth and the moon, and those cycles reflect that. And so the hayd, the cycle, is the dismantling of the altar of life, and it's a spiritual realm all on its own. And when that feminine energy is harnessed, it can really transform into creative energy. And there have been some incredible women scholars and incredible women teachers who so beautifully harnessed that energy that they had some of their greatest spiritual openings and some of their greatest understandings of the Quran and of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and of our world, when they were on their moon, when they were bleeding. Because during the moon time, a woman is more capable of tapping into other realms. A woman is more earth. She has energy and chi that is flowing directly from her womb into the earth. If we were living in a different age, in an earlier age, that flow is not just energetic, but it's also physical, where that flow is returning directly back into the earth, right? And so spiritual experiences come in polarities, and so it's no wonder that women traditionally bleed on the full moon, because it's a lunar cycle. When it's full and it's ready to shed, women, will bleed, and that's why women's cycles sync up. And when we're in true community, we cycle up together, and it's the same principle of when people gather for prayer and stand shoulder to shoulder and are about to engage in prayer, the heartbeats sync up. It's that same principle of community. And so when women are in close proximity to one another, there is an expression of a collective bleeding, which also means that women will ovulate at the same time, which also means that women will become pregnant at the same time. And that creates so much more ease in building community. So you understand that all of this is meant to build community, to build unity, to build harmony in the earth, in the world, in humanity. It's all of this is structured so that we can build our beloved community, right? And so for me personally, some of my own greatest openings, which are not many or great, but they have been when I was on my moon. And so, I'm speaking from a lot of teachings that I've received from my mother and other teachers, but also from my own experience. And it's pretty incredible to chart this. So if you are a mother, or if you are a father, one of the most amazing things we can do for our daughters, for our sisters, for our wives, is encourage them to get to know their bodies better. Because when we get to know ourselves in that very pithy tradition, it says, the one who knows themselves knows God, right? Knows their Lord. And so when we get to know ourselves more deeply, we come to know God more deeply. When we come to know ourselves more beautifully, we come to know God more beautifully. Because with greater understanding of anything comes a greater understanding of everything. That's why we're encouraged to seek knowledge anywhere, to seek knowledge, to the moon and back. The actual tradition is to China, but, we've been to the moon at this point. Yeah, some people say we haven't, but anyhow, but it's just incredible, because one of the things about modern life is that with artificial light and constantly bright nights, we've disrupted our natural inclination to be in synchronicity with the moon, and we've lost our ability to to look and gaze at the cosmos and at the relationship between the moon and the sky and the stars, and we've lost our knowledge of astronomy. Certainly there are astronomers, but the average person had some basic knowledge of astronomy at a certain point. At a certain point in our human history, you kind of had to, right? But we've lost our connection with the moon, and we generally have no idea what particular phase it's in, and that is so detrimental and dangerous, because that also means that we have lost our ability to be in relationship with our bodies and to synchronize with the moon phases, because as I said before, women ovulate with a full moon and bleed at the darkest part. I think I actually said that incorrectly the first time. So yeah, women ovulate with a full moon and bleed at the dark of the moon. And some women have the opposite cycle depending on their phase in life. And it often will switch backwards and forwards, but it's generally pretty consistent. But because we've lost that relationship with artificial light and things like that, we've lost that relationship, and so we can understand the incredible tradition within Islam, which is to witness the moon cycles, which is to know what station the moon is in, and that isn't just a practice so that we can fast on the proper days. It's a practice because it actually engages us with. It allows us to engage our bodies. It allows us to sync up and be in harmony with the rhythms which exist in this world, which has been created essentially for us. And so, if indeed consciousness itself is a spiritual experience, to witness the moon and to gaze at the stars, these are parts of our spiritual practices as Muslims and as conscious beings. It's so important for us to do that. And so, like I said, one of the practices that we need to be doing is charting these things and writing them down and encouraging our sisters to do it. And preserving that knowledge. That's one of the most important things, to create traditions and rituals around these things. This is not innovation. These things existed within the cultures that Islam came to, and they were embraced. But modernity has erased a lot of that in favor of, pop culture and things like that. And so, for me, growing up, it's kind of funny. I had this sheikh who I was very blessed to have as a young woman, and he he was my Quran teacher, and may God bless him. But he taught me a majority of the Quran that I have memorized now, even to now, even though anyway, may God bless him. but he would always say this incredible thing, because oftentimes the girls, who were raised in more traditional homes, and less open-minded and more conservative homes, he wanted these girls to continue to memorize the Quran even when they would start their cycle, even though he was a sheikh, right? He was an Azhari scholar. But he had the opinion that women are not meant to be devils. He would make the joke, like, is a woman meant to be a devil when she is on her moon? She's not allowed to pray. She's not allowed to fast. She's not allowed to read Quran. So is she meant to turn into a devil? You would often ask. And I think, while that was a joke, essentially he's right. One of the things that maybe he didn't recognize, though, is that a woman in that cycle is in a constant state of prayer. At least in my opinion, in my estimation, a woman during that very spiritually powerful time is constantly in a state of prayer, by virtue of her body doing essentially God's work, creating and dismantling the altar of life, the place from which we all came from. We were all born of a womb. We were all born of a woman with a womb, right? No matter who we are and where we came from, we were all born from that. And so, there's a hadith that says, al-mu'min la yunjas, right? And so, essentially, it's what that translates to is that a believer does not or cannot be sullied, cannot be put into a state of najasa, right? Or of I don't know how to translate that properly, because my brain at this hour is not fully functional. So najasa is the state which you enter into, like after you relieve yourself in the bathroom, or coming into contact with blood and things like that. But the hadith, the tradition of the Prophet says that the believer does not or cannot be made to enter into that state. And so essentially it's saying that there's nothing anyone can even do about that. So why would the Prophet Muhammad say that, but also give the teaching that, there is such a thing as najasa, as this thing which takes you out of ritual purity? But, the idea behind that is that essentially we are always in these states of one of my teachers would say that, we are all saints. We're all striving and struggling to be our best selves, that we are all pure in that struggle and in that striving for that purity, that tahara, that ritual state. And so when a woman bleeds, she's not entering into a state of najasa, right? That is also a fiction. It's a fiction that was actually learned from those who were around the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in the city of Medina, the Jewish tribes. The women in the Jewish tradition are essentially cast aside and set aside during their moons. And one of the reasons for that is the idea of ritual, that women would gather and it would be kind of like a community party. The women would all go into the red tent, and essentially they would all be in ritual and all be in worship and all be in community together during that state of heightened spirituality, during that state of you know, a need for heightened self-care. These women could be there for one another. But unfortunately, we didn't receive those rituals. Instead, we just took the idea that women were to be set aside, and men found this to be very mysterious. And so, you know, they put all these parameters around it, like, you know, we don't understand it, so it must be dirty. We don't understand it, so it must be bad. When really, it's none of that. That it's this. You know, women often describe the state of being on your moon as being raw, as being emotional. You know, as you know, experiencing PMS, where watching a commercial for a cat food with a cute kitten, you know, can make a woman cry during that time. It's not because women are too emotional during that time. It's just that emotions and spirituality are heightened and deepened, and openings are heightened and deepened, and that tears being closer to the surface of a woman's eyes during those days, and a woman's heart being more tender, that's actually God ennobling a woman and calling her to deeper attention and connection, and deeper spiritual experience. And so instead of seeing our moons and our cycles as curses and as negative and as a thing that we, you know, hate, instead our periods become a way for us to connect to our Creator. So there are all these amazing things that we can do to do that, especially as women. So one of the things is if you have daughters, you know, like a lot of us didn't receive teachings about this. We didn't receive rituals. We didn't receive ceremony when we entered into these states. So if you have daughters, one of the most amazing things you can do for them is to teach them about their bodies and to teach them about this amazing opportunity that they will have in their lives. You know, that on average, it's approximately estimated to be 500 weeks. 500 weeks, or, you know, 3,500 days of heightened inspiration, of heightened guidance, of heightened spirituality. And so, you know, we need to teach our daughters that this is a time where, yes, sometimes our physical energy is lower, but our intuition and sensitivity is higher. This is a time for quiet reflection, for meditation, for chanting, for music, for art, for creation. This is a time and space for ritual and spiritual practice. You know, this is a time for intense reflection and dhikr and creation. This is, you know, just a beautiful time. And one of the things that I've received from some of my teachers is that if women don't do this, and if women aren't given these teachings, it actually harms women physically. And that's why you see a lot of women with adrenal fatigue. That's why you see a lot of women with hormonal imbalances. That's why you see a lot of women with you know, difficulty in the transitionary phases, like some women who experience, you know, intense cramping and intense PMS and things like that. It's because we're not actually engaging our bodies the way that they're meant to be engaged. We're not actually being in relationship with our bodies the way that we're supposed to. We don't take the space and the time to honor our bodies in the way that God has intended us to. And so, you know, like I said before, one of the things is that we must teach our daughters these ideas. We must pass on this knowledge. You know, that their salvation is not in anyone else's hands, that they have full agency, and that they have a window and a tool in their toolbox, right, in their toolkit that God has given them, especially so that they can come to know their Creator more deeply, more beautifully, and that creation of love in that relationship between body and self and God, moving from the negative into the positive, it can only help us. It can only create a more beautiful paradigm for us to exist inside of. And so this isn't really about, the physical prayer and why we don't pray and why we don't fast. There's so much talk about that, but what we don't talk about is the idea that women like Hawa, women like Mary, Eve is Hawa, women like the mother of Prophet Muhammad, Amina, like Khadija, like Aisha, like the wife of Pharaoh, Asiyah, and like I said Mary, but like Mary, these women show us that our salvation is in our own hands, and that we can't wait. We can't wait for salvation to come running to us, or for teachings or guidance to come running to us. That we have to be our own salvation. Essentially, we have to be the righteous ones who bring ourselves into that honor with God through our actions, through our right relationships with God and our bodies, right? And so when we welcome our daughters into womanhood, we can welcome them with ceremony, that, now, daughter, you are of the age of responsibility, and how can we honor you? And I don't think we have to do anything contrived and figure out ceremony that's going to work across the board, but every young woman knows what she likes and what she doesn't like, and what if we honored our young women around that time of a rite of passage with something that was beautiful for them, and created a memory for them, and a way for them to honor their own bodies? What if that was the world we lived in? How would the world look? Instead, so many of us experienced like shame around the time when we started to bleed, and confusion, and you just hear so many stories about things like that. There are so many things that women can do, like creating sister circles, women's circles, where women can gather and share experiences. We all came from wombs. We all came from this point of existence, right? We all came from this source, from the higher source, of course, but from this earthly source. And so we must unlearn, as women and men, we must unlearn the stigmas around women's bodies, around the blood that comes from women's bodies, and not be afraid of it, especially not to be disgusted by it. There are really detrimental ways of speaking about this, like a woman being on the rag, or the way women are dismissed during that time of the month. Oh, she must be on her period. We need to let go of talking about these things in this way, because it's not only bad for us, it actually harms us in physical ways, in energetic ways. There are so many layers to this, and that this is actually that we need to shift the narrative, that this is actually an opportunity for both women and men to receive wisdom, because this is a time when women are more the veils, the energetic veils are more thin. Right? They're more thin, and this is seen, like when women are in labor, for instance. Many women will talk about the experience of being in labor as being otherworldly, and I don't mean to get too abstract about these things, but this is a generally experienced thing, that it's otherworldly, that a woman kind of goes into another place where there's a less understanding of time and things like that. So what does that mean if that is what labor is like? Well, to be releasing life, to be bearing life in that moment, well, to be on your period is just a lesser part of that. It's a 9 months lesser, but nonetheless lesser experience of that. And so, it is this time when women can receive wisdom, and men and women can learn from that. When we become engaged in something divinely ordained, right? A woman to be on her period is divinely ordained. It's not her choice. It is from the divine, orchestrated by none other than the relationship between the earth and the moon. I mean, when you talk about it this way, and when you really think about it this way, it's kind of bewildering, and it's kind of wild, but I certainly experience it as beautiful, and for me it shakes me to my core, and it helps me to see that there's so much more that I personally could be doing with this time of my life. And so, as women's bodies prepare to grow life, the cycle, just remembering that it can be so powerful, and just to understand that we all emerged from this cycle, And so, developing practices like sitting in meditation, or sitting in contemplation of God, or sitting in dhikr and mentioning the names of God, during these states and these cycles, it's really important. One teacher of mine says that, sure, you're not supposed to physically pray, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't set 5 times of your day aside where the sun is in those key positions, right? Again, relating it back to the cosmos, relating it back to being a witness to what's happening in the relationship between the earth and the sun and the moon, right? So at those key points, like at Fajr, at Dhuhr, at Maghrib, Asr, at Maghrib, at Isha, when the sun is just but before it's risen, when the sun is at its apex, when the sun is just between apex and sunset, when the sun sets and we're at total darkness, to set aside those times and to be in a state of prayer, to be in a state of fikr, of contemplation, of dhikr, of remembrance. Like the Prophet Muhammad, he gave us litanies. He gave us things we could say and prayers we could say that don't require physical prayer or ritual purity, if you believe that you need that. For instance, like reading Quran or something like that. But there are ways, if you hold those beliefs around that, like just to sit in remembrance. And so, to do those kinds of, to have those kinds of practices, it shifts the narrative. It shifts what's happening in the world, and you can return the world to greater justice simply by sitting down and being in a state of prayer, being in a state of meditation, by honoring our bodies in these ways. And so, again, this isn't, I can't say this enough, but this isn't just a woman's thing, this isn't just a woman's, it's not just women who have to understand this, because, men are half of the equation for bringing life into the world. You know, men are half of the equation for raising women in the world. And so, you know, it's just so important that we be in constant communication about what this world is. And, you know, it's my greatest wish, it's my greatest prayer, that we engage with one another in more beautiful ways, in more harmonious ways, that we can return the world to greater balance. And I think that'll manifest as environmental balance, you know, with a return to a lesser destruction of the earth, and a greater love and care and gentleness for the earth. And it'll manifest in so many beautiful ways, and all of it stems from the way we see women's bodies. And you know, these are conversations that men need to have with other men. Certainly men need to have with other men, because, you know, I've heard too many conversations about how, you know, just men kind of talking about women's bodies as if, you know, they're just objects. And so when we cease to see that as true, and we see women's bodies as an integral part of the thing which will shift our world back into greater harmony and justice and love and peace, you know, we'll be one step closer to healing ourselves and healing the world. So I'll leave it there, and we can open it up to questions and answers. And hopefully there are a couple more things that I wanted to mention, but I want to make sure that there's time. So, Andy.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
It's a bit echoey. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Thank you so very much, Sayyida Mona, for the very rich and relevant and, as you said, layered discussion. It seemed like every, you know, word peeled back another kind of epiphany, small epiphany. And some things that stood out were you're mentioning the womb bearing life and weeping, and it weeping at the shedding of that, and it being blood instead of tears at the loss of life for that cycle. Like you opened with that, and also just how it's a time that's a gift to women. It's gifted. One thing also that really stood out was that you said it's like hearts in prayer, and that when we ovulate, or when we are on our cycle, that it's also in sync with when we're in true community, our ovulation, and thus our births. And like when we're in prayer, our hearts are in sync. So I really loved that you pointed out how it all goes back to community and really like unity. So thank you, really, that was very amazing. And yeah, there's so many good gems in this, but definitely want to open it up to others. Hopefully somebody can help out with unmuting, because what happens is if someone is talking, like if there are two people talking at the same time, sometimes if there are too many people unmuted, it can make echoes. So we just want to be mindful of that. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and open it up if anyone has questions.
Yes, I had a question. Thank you so much for your comment about Mona's talk. It was definitely so accurate. Yes, this is just a wonderful topic. I wanted to ask Mona about, you said something about the red tents. Was this a practice among some cultures before the Jews? When did this take place, and when did this not take place? And it was like shut off. I wanted to ask you a bit more about that custom.
Yeah, so I know that it certainly existed within the Jewish culture, especially the Arabian Jews, who